New stuff. So new categories. I always do this every webinar. So they're basically all restaurant categories, and there hasn't been anything new for the last few weeks. I know we didn't do one last month, so this is pretty much leftovers of speaking of restaurants. They seem to be restaurant categories for not North America, but some of them might apply to you. So take a look. If you do have a restaurant, you might want to put one of these as a secondary category, for example.
Those are awfully specific, Jan.
Yeah, I know. I didn't even know what like a Meghan is. I had to look that up to make sure that it was a
restaurant. I guess if you're looking for those niche things, now you can find them. But I like fish restaurant.
Fish, it's kind of generic, that one, but
yeah.
If they apply, they apply. So it's good to know when they're there. We have some GMB bugs. There's always a few bugs here and there, but some of the ones to note right now is there's a weird bug right now. It's this, I'm calling it the service establishment bug. You'll see on the image there, I have a Chrome extension that allows me to see what the categories are, so I don't have to look in the back-end code of a page, for example. And service establishment is showing up, and it's not supposed to show up. That's basically like one of those internal Google things that Google puts categories in. And right now it's only affecting service area businesses. And it seems to be matched up with some ranking anomalies. So maybe the rankings are poor, or they're not ranking where they're supposed to be, but it's not like far away. It's kind of like if you're in one part of the city, well, you might be ranking in another part of the city, which is kind of weird. So if your rankings have dropped in your service area businesses, you might want to check to see if you're getting affected by the service establishment bug. Google is looking into it, and we don't know when it'll be fixed, but because it's somewhat new. But it's just nice to know that if you are doing like scans on local Falcon and all of a sudden things go wonky, it might be because there's a bug, and it's nice to know at least what's going on. There's another bug that's affecting some users where they're uploading an image in the back end, but it doesn't show on the public side, and Google is also looking into that. I haven't heard that much about it. It's not, it doesn't impact ranking, so it's not a huge deal, but it's still something that we see in the forum coming up. I uploaded images and they're not showing up. Well, yeah, it's a bug, and people are complaining about it, and Google is looking into it to see if it's going to get fixed.
Hey, Jan, on that note, Tanya asked a question. What Chrome browser or extension do you use, and how accurate is it to determine categories?
So I believe this is GMB Everywhere, and accuracy, all it does is looks into the code of, like if you go and bring up your listing on Maps and you right click it and view source code, you'll see, all buried in there, these categories are in the code. So all it does is pull in that from the code. So there's no accuracy issue there. It's just, you can see it without using a tool, for example, because it's straight from the page itself. It's not like any secret data that it's pulling in. Yeah. All right. And so another GMB change is that the site manager level is going to be removed, basically. And so you can see here that if you do have some users on your listing that are right now site managers, they're going to be bumped up to the manager level. So you might want to check your list of users. If you're a large organization and you have some people that are site managers, they're going to automatically get access to all the manager functionality. And I don't know when it's going to take place. Sherry, you might have a better idea. I think they said before the end of the year it'll be done. So I don't know if it's, yeah.
I was just going to say, I think it's rolling out now, isn't it? But it's,
yeah, I think they said they'll be finished by the end of the year, but I don't know when your listing will get impacted. It's just going slowly out to certain groups, I guess. And I don't know what by countries and stuff like that. But there's, if you want to share, Ryan, if you want to share the link in the chat, there is a direct link to the GMB page. so that you can see, it's hard to read on the screen exactly what's changing here. So if you use the link in the chat, you can find that page and you'll see exactly what the functionality difference is going to be. So that could be a potential user issue if you don't want someone to have access, and so you're gonna have to remove them. And the reason why Google is getting into that is that there just wasn't enough people using the site manager level, and so they didn't want to support that level. So it's just cleans up their code, I guess, to remove stuff like this.
It's interesting though, because they're giving quite a lot more access. They're just rolling people right into like a lot more access.
Yeah, I thought it was, I gave my feedback to them, and I thought maybe they shouldn't have called it site manager. They should have called it like content manager or something. And that way people would understand a little bit better, because, as a business owner, like, what's a manager? What's a site manager? What's the difference? If they don't go to the page and look, because it's called manager, I would have called it a different word, but they didn't. I think they were just looking for an excuse to remove it all together, and so that's what they're doing. All right, so we'll move off of GMB, and we'll go into some of the Google organic changes. And so this came up I think it's been for a few months they've been testing it, but I'm seeing it a lot more often now, where we see organic results are getting indented. And so basically what's happening is, if you've had two pages that were ranking relatively close to each other, so I did a search and I had one that was like, one page was ranking 10th and one page was ranking 15th for the same query, and now you do that same query, now you get the 10th and you'll get an indented 11th, right? So it's kind of bringing related pages of the same site together. And so I don't really know how this is going to play out, but I know it's going to affect your rank tracking. I often go into Search Console and I look and I see where is a page ranking for a certain keyword. And now if it's going to indent and pull them together, it might, it's going to play around with, if you do that kind of analysis often, it's going to completely change the rankings for certain pages. Not because the page, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Edgar asked, do the Google indented results only apply to the desktop SERP?
I've only seen it on the desktop. Has anyone else seen it on mobile? I don't check mobile as often, so I've only seen it on desktop at this point. Yeah. And I was going to say something, but now I forgot.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no problem. And then we'll just move to the next slide. Here is the big thing that's been going on. It's been a month or so at this point, is the Google page title rewrites. And Google has, updated it since last month to make it a little bit better, but it's still affecting a lot of pages for clients. I recently did a check 2 days ago, and I still have some pages. It was more on an e-commerce site where Google is messing around with the titles where they're not, I wouldn't consider them optimal. They would, put stuff all in lowercase and stripping some of the call to action parts off the title. So there's a few tools, and Ryan, if you want to share those links in the chat, you can check out how to do that yourself. And I think what I'll do is I'll just create a video and I'll put it in our Facebook group as well. I like to use the Chrome extension one, because then you could just do a site search and you can go through all your titles real quick to see because it gives a little indication of which one got changed, and you can do a quick check to see which ones are different. SEOs are calling this title Geddon. I think it did affect some people really poorly, and it affected their click-through rate because, like I said, the call to actions and some of the wording is wrong. So I'll open it up to the panel at this point, because this is our main topic for today.
So this is the SEO Armageddon. I love how serious we are about that. But I know it's a big deal because Sherry brought it up as the topic for to talk about today. And I just I spend a lot of time writing meta stuff for websites, titles, meta descriptions, And and I also understand, Google wants everything to be organic. They want to sort of be in charge of what they display and how they say it. But I was surprised to see that they're changing the titles that people are writing for pages. So how did this happen? And do you think that that's how it's going to just go in the future?
They've been doing it for a while, actually. I think, what did they say? I think since 2012, Jan, that they've been kind of doing this for a while now. But I think it's now that they're just kind of pushing it out even further.
It started because people would, keyword stuffing. If you have a title and it's like lawyer, 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 like you put 20 they want to get rid of that kind of stuff. So, if you go to their blog and you take a look at why they're doing it, it's to avoid people who are like totally keyword stuffing their titles. They gave examples of like e-commerce stores where they have lots of products, but the products are changing on a page, for example, but the title no longer reflects accurately what's on the page because there's dynamic content. And so Google is looking at your page and then adjusting the title to make sure that it matches. A lot of times now Google is using your H1 tag as your title instead of using your defined title. So there's reasons that it makes sense. And, and a lot of, especially for small businesses, sometimes we'll look at sites that are really poorly optimized, and they'll just, the home page still says home on it. And every single page on the site is exactly the same because their CMS just has every single page named the same. So Google is trying to, in a way, help those inaccuracies. But by doing so, it's removing some of the good stuff where people are, when they're actually paying attention. So
yeah. So
what percentage of pages would you guys estimate that like no work has been done to create titles and that metadata?
I don't know about like the percentage of pages that people are not creating titles, but I do know that when they released notification that they were going to be doing this, they said that they were still using titles 80% of the time, but they released a new update on September 19th, I believe. Now based on the feedback that they've received, they're now saying that they're using titles 87% of the time. So there is a feedback form that you can go to and leave feedback about search results that you've seen. And apparently they've gotten some pretty heavy feedback, which is why I think they've increased the usage of actual titles versus using their own. So it's now up to 87% that they're using titles versus picking their own now. So I think that's a good thing. But like Jan says, there are a lot of business owners that just don't know what a title is. So it just says home or it just says the site name or whatever. And so that's not very helpful to the user. So I see why they did it. It's just that some of the results just are not very helpful either.
If you go to the title getting hashtag on Twitter, you'll see a lot of examples of poor or silly or things that are opposite of what the intention is of the page. So we kind of laugh as SEOs, but we also get scared when we see stuff like that.
Well, how is it going to impact? So, I mean, titles, when you're the stuff that creates that search engine result blurb, I mean, I'm not an expert. You guys have to tell me, but that's really about the user experience. Like, it's really about whether or not you would click through. We all make that decision when we do a search, and then, we're provided a bunch of entries, and we sort of probably unconsciously make our decisions about where we're going to go based on, whether we think it's relevant to our search, and also, is this the type of entity that I want the answer from? Like, so, I'll pick Wikipedia if I'm looking for, a broad education. I'll pick a sales site or a vendor if I'm looking for a product. But other than the consumer experience, what else does that changing that SERP entry affect?
I like to think of like the title and the description. The way I describe it to my clients is it's almost like an ad. So the title is the headline of the ad, and the description is the body of the content of the ad. And so to me, it's like this is your one opportunity to get that searcher to click on your link. And so if it's not what you want it to be, then that's a missed opportunity perhaps for that searcher to click on and go to your website.
And from what you've seen, when Google is, now changing them or picking their own title, are they doing a good job, for that user experience? Is it descriptive of what people are going to find when they go to that site?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. I think like Jan said, there's examples of both. I think what this means though, is that we also have to pay attention as SEOs, what our headings are, what our H1s and H2s and H3s are, how we're what text we're putting in bold. Probably also what our introductory paragraph is, like what our first 100 words are, those types of things. I've seen and heard of image alt tags getting put in as title tags, which doesn't make much sense in a lot of cases. Jan, you can probably, or Kevin, you can probably talk to some other oddities that you've seen as well. But I think there's been some strange instances going on as well that have probably not been very helpful to the end user.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen cases where it's almost dependent on the HTML semantic structure of the page. So you might have an image in a place where where Google pulls it, depending on where everything's laid out. So you land on a page, visually you look at it and there's certain elements in different places, but every theme of a website or the way it's built is always different. So as Google's trying to pull the most relevant stuff, we've seen cases where they're pulling in, like you said, alt text of images and putting that in the title for the meta title, and then also including text like that in the meta description. So definitely not optimized for a good conversion rate.
Bill asked the question, how do we combat the title rewrite? Is there anything that we can do, or are we solely subjected to Google's discretion? If so, is it worth still spending time and resources on metadata?
Yeah, you definitely need to still do your titles right, because Google will, according to Google, they'll still use titles 87% of the time. But I think it also means that like I said, your other elements that people see on your page needs to be optimized as well, in case Google decides to use those elements instead of your title. So you need to be extra careful about your site name, for instance, or your page names or your titles and your headings, and those types of things need to be very optimized as well, just in case Google decides to pull those things instead.
And an important thing is that Google has said that they use the original page title for their rankings. So even though they might have stripped a lot of stuff and are displaying something on the SERP, they are using what you've written in the algorithm to do the ranking. So you still want to have all your keywords and all that stuff, even though Google might be taking out all that extra stuff to show it, they're still counting it. So you still want to optimize it properly.
So really, it's more important than ever to have your meta done correctly, but then you also have to make sure that your headings are aligned. And like Kevin said, depending on how the page is arranged, Google's trying to pull the most prominent things. And so if the most prominent thing is an alt tag to a picture, you better make sure that that's relevant too. And so now it's even, I guess, more work aligning everything to make sure that it's all saying the same thing about that page, which, as a marketer, like, it's hard enough to get businesses just to have this stuff done once, much less to like police their content. Easier said than done. But
yeah, it used to be you would just write it. You would just write it, and now you have to actually check to see And I mean, I could bring up my screen just to show us some examples in case some people don't really understand what it is. So let me just.
Yeah. I mean, while you're doing that, then you get into the accessibility stuff, right? Where you're having to describe things and make it more manageable for someone who might have some sort of a disability. Or so then Google pulls that data in, and it might be more descriptive to help somebody who's using a screen reader, but not necessarily for SEO purposes. So
Right. So this is a keyword searcher Chrome extension that I've added. I think that the link's in the chat there. You'll see that, I mean, it puts a lot of icons here, but basically what it does is puts this title changed here. And for me, what I've done, because my sites aren't that big for local, is I just go to the site, you do site colon, so basically a site search, and that way you can get a list of all your pages, and then the Chrome extension will tell you which ones are changed from the original, and you just have to hover over it to see the original one. So most of them, they're not that bad. They've just, like in this case, put the branding in the front instead of at the end. You know, same thing, they've removed the branding here. So some of it, like, it's just to help, and it doesn't make a huge difference. So you kind of let that one pass, those kind of things pass. This one says questions, we're here to help, instead of saying frequently asked questions. So if we go to that page, it's taking it from, it's rewriting the title from this, which is probably, yeah, it's the H1. So in this case, it's taking the H1 and it's showing in there instead, right? So in this case, product pricing, they've just lowercased it, which looks kind of unprofessional. If there's a list and it's not just my site here, if there's a whole list and then yours is the only one that's all lowercase while other ones are more normalized, then you're not going to get that click, right? So you're going to want to check that kind of thing. So in this case, it just says pricing with our brand, and Google rewrites it to product pricing. So if we look at the page, and this is where you're going to want to look, for some reason, it's pulling it from the H1, probably here, but because it's all uppercase, Google is, for some reason, putting it all lowercase because it's not smart enough to try to capitalize the first word. So if we see instances like that and we think it's a big enough deal, then we'll probably go on to this page and rewrite this and put, maybe make these lowercase, and maybe Google will automatically figure it out instead of just putting it all, taking all this uppercase and changing it to lowercase, right? So that's the kind of thing that it's extra work now for a business owner or site manager to have to go and check and see. And like we're all saying here, sometimes it pulls from the H1, sometimes it pulls from an alt tag of an image. Sometimes I've even seen that it pulls from, you have another link on your site, another page on your site that's linking to that page, and it's using the anchor text from that other page as the title for this page, which is really odd, but you have to sometimes figure it out. But that's more rare. But so you just hover and go through them. And if you just do that site search, you'll be able to really see which ones are changing.
And that's a great tip that I just learned from Jan probably 2 months ago, is how to view the SERP, entry for each page of every website that we manage. That's so helpful. And if, if I just click through them and I can see what's changed, then, I can go and make edits to the H1s, or like that weird thing with the capitalization. We can change the capitalization on the site, make sure that everything is so that Google can read it better if they're going to be pulling the data. So that's a really cool tip with the site colon and then whatever your site is. Pull every page, and you can see when he showed me how to do that, because we do agency work too, I went and did that for every site that we have anything to do with. And it's a great way to show your clients how they're showing up and whether or not, their search engine result entries look appetizing to the user, or they don't, if they explain what it is or they don't. So that's a really cool tool, which probably everybody but me already knows. And but if you don't, that's a good one.
Yeah, Sarah, I was just going to say, this opens up, and if you're an agency, a whole nother avenue to actually help clients with, because the average everyday business owner is not going to know this. Right.
Right.
And so if you can show them on the screen how their title tags look, I mean, it's hard enough to get them to write title tags to begin with, but now you have the opportunity to show them.
Right. People don't want to write
Exactly.
they definitely don't want to write. They certainly don't want to write websites. And then when you start explaining that there's ghost stuff to write on a website, like everybody's done.
Their head explodes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yep.
It's like, this doesn't appear anywhere except it's the most important thing that you have.
This is what is going to cause somebody to actually click. Either they're going to click, this is your one chance to get them, and it better capture their attention and make them click on your link. So yeah.
Yep. And I want to, I don't know, Steve and Megan, I know you guys joined a couple of minutes after we started. I don't know if you have anything in particular you wanted to talk about with this change. And if you don't, that's okay, because we have a lot of questions and answers to do. We can jump in on that too. So this is a general question. Jeffrey asked, what is the average time frame right now on GMB support requests? And I know you guys have a lot of experience working directly with Google. You all have sort of an inside track and get to talk to Google, and you know how strangely Google operates. But maybe talk a little bit about when you put in a support request, what happens to it, how long it takes, who's processing that, or you know what I mean? I think Google's kind of a big like black hole that nobody understands how that works.
Jan, you want to take this one?
No, go ahead. I'm always here. Go ahead. You're the special guest.
No, I was just going to say it depends on what type of support ticket you're putting in. So if it's regarding a suspension, particularly like a service area business, it can take up to 2 weeks for them to make a decision and get back with you about that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jan. Because Google support is mostly run out of India. India right now is having a lot of COVID issues. And so there are extra delays going to happen. Now, we are hearing some issues where some people aren't hearing back from support for like 2 weeks, which in some cases, I think that's just a fluke. You should typically hear back from them within around 72 hours. But we have heard more of a delay in a lot of cases. So that's typically how long it would take for them to get back with you on a normal question.
And I think they prioritize suspension. So sometimes you'll see that even get turned around faster.
Yeah.
So the other stuff, you know, the thing with Google is that there'll be issues, but they don't really care about your business in the sense that if your rankings are messed up, if you're not showing you're losing business, it's just, you're just on the queue, right? So that's, they don't seem to understand where it's really impacting a business's revenue when they take long. But normally they try to prioritize the suspensions to try to get those ones fixed first.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, it's hard for business owners to understand that Google has kind of like two customers, right? They have the business owners who have their GMB listings, but they also have the searchers too. And so, you know, they have two sets of customers that they're working with. And so the business owners aren't the only customers of Google My Business, which is why, for instance, they let users suggest edits to those listings. And so, like Jan says, you know, suspensions, they try to prioritize those because, you know, they're impacting a business. If they're suspended, they obviously aren't going to be showing up, or they aren't going to be able to make updates to their listing, and those changes aren't going to stick because they're suspended. So yeah, in most cases, suspensions are handled, I think, within 2 to 3 days, but it can take, you know, 2 weeks for your listing to get up again. I guess that's what I meant to say, for your listing to get live again after the suspension is resolved. But yeah, within 72 hours or 2 to 3 days is typically what they expect. But like I said, because of COVID, it can take longer.
And just to add on to that too, I think like when we're talking about the 72 hours, that's like for them to respond to your initial submission for them to review. And I think when that gets once you kind of open up that conversation, if you can have your documentation, whether it's like a photo of your business actually being there or the signage, depends on why you think you're suspended. If you can kind of provide them that proof, we've seen that our cases get resolved rather quickly versus that ongoing back and forth, because every time you have to send a message to them or they respond to you, it's just going to take that much longer. So that's been helpful we may get that 72-hour response, but in order to get it resolved, providing that up front is helpful.
That's
Megan, I was
awesome,
at
Megan.
the DMV yesterday, and it kind of reminds me of that. You better make sure when you get to the window, when your number is called, you have your everything, passport, social security, because it's like they process it, and if they can't process it, then you're back to the back of the line again.
Love the DMV.
That's true.
Megan, that's an awesome point. The other thing you want to be sure you keep track of is your case ID number, which is going to be in the subject line, because if for some reason you need help from like the GMB support forum, it's very helpful for the volunteers there to have a case ID number, just in case you need to have that issue escalated for some reason. So always keep the emails that you get from GMB support is what I'm trying to say, because they will come in handy if you can't get an issue resolved.
All right, Delfino asked a question. I'm about to slaughter the names of 3 different products I've never heard of. So here's Delfino's question. Thanks for sharing the Plepper SEO extension. I'd ultimately like to have just one. What are your thoughts on this versus the Uber Suggest and or Ahrefs extensions? Was I close on those pronunciations?
Is that for keyword research? Is that what he's trying to figure out? Or is it for categories?
I don't know. Well, that
Yeah, the Plepper one, it was for looking at the GMB categories. I mean, they have
that's the one that Jan just shared.
tools.
I think the one I had, was it Plepper or was it GMB? Anyway, there's a couple. There's GMB everywhere, and Plepper will do the same thing. So and I think that's part of the question. I'll let other people chime in for the specific tools, is that there's a lot of extensions that do lots of things, but and even for me, I'll use like 3-4 of them because I'll need one little specific thing that I use often that none of the other ones have. And so it's kind of annoying to have so many extensions to do all these little functionalities. There's not one thing that does everything. And I think that's why, and these are free tools. A lot of them are just free or freemium. And so that's why you're not going to get all the functionality, because it does cost money to support and build all that stuff.
And then when you just take a screenshot of something, you have to turn all those extensions off so that you don't have all that stuff showing up.
Yeah, I go to when that happens to me, I'll go to an incognito tab, so I won't have those. I'll turn it off at incognito, and then I'll go to incognito and take the screenshot on that. That way I don't have to. Yeah.
It also helps to be in Canada.
No, that doesn't.
I'm just kidding. On that note, Allegra asked a question. Is there a tool that any of you panelists use to track screenshots of SERP structure changes over time that go back to the beginning of Google? I've been manually taking screenshots of the SERP, but it's a pain. I don't know what would go back, like all the way in history.
I don't know one that would go back. I know that Bright Local has a free tool that will track your rankings, and it will actually show screenshots of the SERP results. But I don't think it will like go back. But what you could do is take screenshots of the screenshots, but that's probably not any better than what she's doing right now.
I mean, you could look at something like Wayback Machine, where it'll pull in all the data from the site. If it's a larger site, you'll have more success with that. If it's a smaller local business that doesn't get as much traffic, then you might not get snapshots like you would the bigger site. But other than doing like regular crawling, I know Sitebulb has options where you can take screenshots when you crawl. So if you're doing monthly crawls, then you can do something like that.
So Joe just brought up a point, Jan, when you were showing on the DBA platform site, the product pricing. So Joe said that product pricing might be in lowercase in the code, but CSS is turning it to all caps. So Google might be grabbing it, you know, all lowercase. Just an interesting point there. So Leslie has a question. I'm not sure that I understand it. So if we have the title or keywords as content on the page, would that help with the rewrite? So I think the question is, like, if the same content that's in the hidden metas, if we had that on the page, you know, as the H1 or as whatever, does that help with the rewrite?
I guess it could. As long as Google thinks it's relevant to the topic of the page. And I think that's what Google's also looking at, because some of the examples that they gave were, like an example that they gave was like, here's the 2020 registration page for a university, but the content on the page was actually the 2021 registration information. They just didn't update their title tag. And so I think Google's actually analyzing the content of the page and kind of matching it up with the title. So if you have, for instance, a totally bogus title that doesn't, and a header that doesn't really, a header that doesn't match really the content of the page, and you're just trying to, let's say, trick Google, I don't think you're going to be able to necessarily fool them. So I guess it all depends on how legitimately it really matches the rest of the content on the page. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's all about the alignment. All of the messages aligned is the best way to get there, leaving nothing to chance. So Brendan asked a question that only I can answer. So this will be the first time. This is like the inaugural only me question. And the question is, what do you mean ghost data? I haven't heard that terminology, but I may know what it is already. Thanks. And yeah, that's just because I don't know what I'm talking about, Brendan. That is not official Google terminology. I'm just calling the meta stuff ghost data because it's attached to a page, but it doesn't appear anywhere on that page. I don't know if you guys have ever explained that to business owners, but you know, your meta title, your meta description, it's not really, you can't read it on the page. And so when I'm teaching writers, SEO writers, how to, you know, write web content, it's confusing because what becomes that search engine entry, the SERP, that's information that's really not on the page. So to make all that stuff line up so that when somebody reads it and clicks through, the page doesn't say that same thing, but it says something aligned with it. I just call that ghost data. So thanks for asking that question that only I could answer. All right, this is a long question from Rob. He says, I'm using products in GMB to display services with images and links on my public-facing GMB. Today, I got a warning from Google about them. Here's what it said. Search Console has identified that your site is affected by 7 product issues. Top warnings. And then warnings are suggestions for improvement. Some warnings can affect your appearance on search. Some might be reclassified as errors in the future. The following warnings were found on your site. Missing field review, missing field skew, missing field description, missing field image, missing field offers. We recommend that you fix these issues. And then the question is, has anybody else seen this, or what is this about?
Yeah, that's typical because I see it all the time, especially if you have actual products on your site. If you're e-commerce, you'll see those warnings come up in Search Console, or if you're doing a schema check. The warnings are not a problem. It's just information that Google usually sees associated with each other. So if you have a product, it wants to see a SKU, because then if it sees a SKU, then it knows what the actual product is, and then it'll pull in maybe other information, that kind of thing. So if it's just a warning, you don't have to worry about it. If you see like a red, if the warnings show up as yellow, there's other times when you're completely missing data that Google wants to show. You won't get those extra features shown in the search results. So if you have a product, then you have price. Sometimes you'll see like starting from, it'll show a price, or starting at with a price, or from this price to that price. You can actually use the schema to show that result underneath your link in Google. The warnings usually don't affect the visibility of that kind of schema. But it's normal if you're missing pieces that it'll show those warnings. I wouldn't worry about it. The only thing you should do is go back and do a site search like I showed before, and see which pages show up. Like if you're doing it on purpose to try to get using the schema to try to show something visible in the SERP, do the site search and make sure that it's showing up the way that you want it to.
Okay, this question we get, I think, every single webinar. So we'll put a different spin on it, and I'll go through all the panelists, and I'll ask for one tip from each on this question. But the question as it was posed from Larry is, I would love to hear an outline of the top 3 elements that have the most impact on putting you in the 3-pack. So that's the local map section. How do you break into that 3-pack? We get that question every single webinar. What has the biggest impact? So you know, I'll give the panelists a second to think. What do you think is the top thing that that helps get a location into that 3-pack? Steve, you got one?
I'll try here. I'm still dealing with a little bit of bronchitis, so I won't talk a ton.
Me too. We're gonna cough. We're gonna cough through this together.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Really, honestly, I believe the biggest impact is coming from the website itself. We have roughly 500 locations across a couple of different brands, and we did a major upgrade to our local websites earlier this year, and that really reassured us that it was the website had the biggest impact of all the things that we did. In addition to that, we found that certainly activity on the GMB, aka posting to it on a weekly basis, in addition to social signals and directory services, are the things that we focus on every GMB that we create that seem to have the biggest impact. But a well-structured website, local website, seems to have at least 30 to 50% of the impact of anything that we do, and not just a splash page website, but multiple pages on a website broken down by products or services or things that you're actually providing to the public, broken out specifically, seem to have specific keyword improvements when we look at local Falcon and how they're impacting the GMB's ranking in the 3-pack.
Yeah, Jan says that one to me all the time when I'm like, posting, GMB activity, relevance, keywords, and he's like, the website. I'm like, oh, right, the website. Good one. All right, Megan, what could you add to that? What do you think is important to breaking into that 3-pack for a local?
Yeah, so fully leveraging all of the attributes, like all of the fields that are given in GMB, because again, Google wants to have that 0-click moment. It wants to show the right answer and make it a really frictionless transaction, or giving the customer, the searcher, the right information. So you can have all of that information on your website, but if you're missing like your menu link, if you're missing messaging's not turned on, if you're not fully utilizing all of those fields and options in GMB, then Google might show another business that is, because it's getting those positive like engagement signals back. So it's not showing you because you don't have it turned on. It's just if somebody else is already showing this information and getting all of that traffic, those are positive signals, and you may be missing out. So it makes you more competitive, one, and then it's giving that like cyclical back positive signal of people engaging with your listing. I mean, we were talking about products. So like, why wouldn't you use these things? I mean, probably scalability sometimes is why, but if you have it on your website, we strongly encourage that it's in your GMB listing.
Well put. Kevin?
I could add, I'm sorry, can I
go ahead.
add to that
Sure.
as well too? is we found that even the blog, like what we do is we write a blog every month, and then we break that blog up into 4 snippets, and then we use those as posts to our Google My Business listings. And Google loves the fact that they're seeing matching content. As Megan said, they want to see that matching content of what you're putting in a GMB is matching equally on what you're having on your website. I think those two authorities connected to each other have a great impact.
Yeah, and you mentioned posts, but we break them out into, it depends on the content, but into a Q&A maybe. So you're asking the question and then answering it as the business owner. And again, that's because if you answer it, they may not have to go all the way to your website, get lost. They may get their question answered and then give you a call, or if you have your bookings link, get their question answered and then book directly through GMB without ever going to the website. Obviously, in support, to back up Steve, like all of that information has to be on your site so that those signals from site are strong. But this is just another seamless way to get that information front and center, and get those positive signals from the engagement.
Excellent. Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah. What I think the biggest thing overall is consistency. So you set up your GMB, you want, I mean, it's a representation of your business in that location. So you want it to be consistent with what your website represents. So like Steve said, having good website structure, good page structure. So when someone lands on it, we like to follow relevance, proximity, and prominence. So when you set up your GMB, if you're posting, it has to be relevant and it has to be consistent with your website. So like you said, with the blog posts, those things all tie in together. So it has to be one cohesive experience. So I don't know if that would help anybody, but.
Well, and Kevin, related to that, Julie's asking, how often would you recommend posting on GMB? We know that there's diminishing returns after a certain point, like, so what do you think is the optimal amount to be posting?
That's a really good question. I think it would be different for every industry. So that's definitely something that you'd have to test. I don't think it would hurt to post on your GMB once a week, but it all comes, I mean, I would recommend that. It helps with conversion rates and just keeps things consistent. You keep getting content on there, and Google sees that you're posting, you're active, and your customers will see that too. So it builds more relevance and more prominence for you in that industry.
And since you mentioned testing, like test the different types of post types, like maybe you're doing an offer, maybe you're doing an event, maybe you're adding a product, to see what your customers or those searching for you are responding to. Like some you may get no engagement and some may be super shareable or get a higher engagement.
Yeah, and every GMB post, or not all of them, have the same expiry. So some last longer than others. So you want to take note of those things as well.
I think when it comes to posting, one of the things that we talk about internally that's interesting is about how fresh the content should or shouldn't be. And with GMB posts are a little bit more top of funnel than other social media posts. So like Facebook, for instance, if people are seeing your Facebook posts, they've already liked your page and they're seeing a lot of your content. For GMB though, a lot of times people are searching for the very first time for something. And so you want your GMB posts to be a little bit more static. It's kind of like I relate it to, and this just shows how far back my SEO goes because it's the yellow pages. But like the yellow pages ad, you would not refresh that content. You know what I mean? You would not like be a plumber and like say, oh, this month, I think in the yellow pages, we should talk about, grease traps. No, it's always the same. It's AAA plumbing, guaranteed, good pricing. There's certain things that you want to get out in that messaging. And that's true for GMB posts. And that's something that confuses a lot of business owners because they want like new content there. But actually, you always have new people there. So the content can kind of remain the same as long as it's good content. There is some refreshing to it and things like that, but a lot less so than for other social media. Sherry and Jan, what do you have to add to that top 3 things to do to get into that 3-pack?
My thing would be making sure you pick the right primary category for your business. So for instance, you need to be very specific about what your business is. So let's say you're an attorney, your first category should not be lawyer. It should be what you specialize in. So if you're a DUI lawyer, that should be your primary category, and maybe lawyer should be your secondary category. So you want to be very specific so that you get the right targeted audience when they're doing their searches for keywords.
Thus, all those new restaurant categories that were very niche that we saw at the beginning of this webinar.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's why I start out every single time with those categories, because if there's a better one, then you pick that one, because that's a huge factor in your rankings and how people are searching. If they're searching for that kind of restaurant, you're going to come up first if all your competitors don't have it yet, right? That's why I put it up front. To add to confirm, like everyone else, yes, the click-through rate and the posting increase the click-through rate, which is a ranking factor. Like Steve said, the website is a huge factor, but a lot of people will get lost on the website because all the organic SEO that you do on your website is going to help your GMB, like when it's your associated website. So the backlinks, the content, the sites, like all that stuff, it's a lot of work. And of course, the GMB name is still a huge ranking factor. So keywords in the name, it has to match the business name, but a lot of companies now are adding names officially so that they can add the names on their GMB. So I guess it's hard because I get the question all the time. And just to answer, the 3 main ones would be the GMB name, the category, and your website. But when you do an audit for a new client, like I'm doing audits all the time, it's a priority list because they all count. And the way I see it, it's kind of like a multiplication of different things. So like if your title is like 10 out of 10 and your website is 10 out of 10, but your category is wrong and it's a 0 out of 10, and you have 10 times 10 times 0 is still 0, right? So depending on which one needs to be fixed first, that's where you have to go for your priority. And you don't know that until maybe someone looks at your site and looks at your GMB and does an audit and says, this is great, this is great, this is great, this is really poor, and it's affecting everything else. Because a lot of times business owners are like, I'm doing this right, I'm doing this right. Yeah, but you've missed this one, and that's why you're not ranking, because your site is not indexed because you put the no index tag on it or something like that, right? So something really basic can block everything that you do. So that's why I see it as a multiplication. And if you get one really poor score, then it affects the overall score. So it's a priority list of what to do.
Yep. And it's definitely worth having an expert take a look and set you in the right direction, because that is very typical that people are doing, like, they're spending a lot of money, time, and effort on certain things, but other things are so broken that it's not helping them. So you want a doctor to just take a look and make sure something isn't like really wrong in your lab results, so to speak, before you set off making everything better. And of course, all these experts, are here, and this is what they do for a living. And if you want to get in touch with any of our panelists that are on the advisory board, or if you have a question that we didn't get to today, please join our private Facebook group where you can find these people, and we will hook you up with any of them to talk to, or if you have a speaking engagement or you just need some extra help, these guys are available. And I would also say, a good thing to do is to use Local Falcon. If you're trying to get into that 3-pack, the Local Falcon tool will show you where you're ranking in every geography today and allow you to build those scores and see those scores change over time. Also understand where your competitors are. So that is a really useful tool. And of course, the Local Falcon is all about figuring out where you rank, and then the DBA platform has a bunch of tools to help you improve that ranking. to help automate your posts and photos and things like that. So if you have any questions about that, reach out to us. You can take a look at those products on the website. You can reach out to us in the Facebook group. We'll answer questions there and help with anything that you need. And then, of course, join us every month for a webinar. And every third month, we have all of our panelists are invited to join and lend their expertise. And I'd like to thank today Megan, Steve, Kevin, Sherry, and Jan for helping inform everything local SEO.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, John.
Always a pleasure. See you guys soon.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.